All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're doing a deep dive into a really significant figure from Senegal, Cheikh Ahmadou Bamba. But we're not just doing a straight biography. We want to focus on a specific text, one that really unlocks his vision, especially for young people. That's Tazawwud al-Siyar.
Right. And the way we're looking at it is, I think, quite special. We're using this in-depth analysis by Dr. Serene Sohaibu Kebe.
Yes.
And he's actually Cheikh Ahmadou Bamba's grandson. So it's this incredible perspective, not just academic study, but real deep family understanding.
Exactly. It adds a whole different layer. So our mission really is to get a handle on who Cheikh Ahmadou Bamba was, the world he lived in, and crucially, why this book, Tazawwud al-Siyar, is seen as so foundational, so beneficial.
Yeah, to sort of unpack it as this guide it was meant to be.
And see how it reflects his whole approach to education and spiritual life.
It's about, well, how a text from that time can still be seen as, like, provisions for life's journey now. The title itself hints at that.
So let's set the stage a little. Cheikh Ahmadou Bamba, born in Mbaki, Senegal, 19th century, comes from this long line of scholars.
A very respected lineage.
Yeah.
And he's often called Al-Qadim, which means the servant.
Right. And his education.
Oh, extensive. Deep grounding in Islamic sciences, Arabic. I mean, he was immersed in that tradition.
Yeah.
But the Senegal he grew up in, well, he was complicated.
How so?
You already had established Sufi orders,
Yeah.
like the Qadiriya, the Tijaniya. They were major forces.
And then there's the unavoidable reality of the French colonial presence, which was growing.
Absolutely. That's the backdrop against which he founded his own order, the Muridiya.
And what was the core idea behind the Muridiya based on Dr. Kebe's analysis?
Well, the source highlights a few key aims: revitalizing the Sunnah, the Prophet's way, a huge emphasis on education, on knowledge,
Okay.
and also on licit work, earning a living through proper means, and striving for autonomy, not just political, but, spiritual and intellectual independence, too.
Yeah. That leads into this idea of his resistance, which is really distinctive. It wasn't about fighting in the typical sense.
No, not at all. The source calls it resistance by the spirit.
What does that actually look like?
It was centered on knowledge, like we said, on spirituality, and also on what the source terms scientific production, basically. His writings, his teachings.
So building inner strength.
Exactly. Building this kind of internal fortress through faith, through learning, through self-reliance, based on legitimate work. It was about refusing to engage purely on the colonizer's terms, creating this separate sphere of spiritual and intellectual power. That was his form of resistance.
It's a really powerful concept, but it definitely came with consequences for him personally.
Oh, absolutely. Multiple exiles. He was sent away to Gabon and later to Mauritania, far away from his followers.
Yeah.
But here's something fascinating the analysis points out. These times of exile, which were meant to silence him, actually became incredibly productive periods for his writing. Yes, he wrote a huge amount during those years. We know about major works like Masalik al-Jinan, but he also specifically wrote a lot aimed at educating young people.
Which brings us nicely back to Tazawwud al-Siyar.
Precisely. The book we're focusing on. And its full title is quite poetic. Tazawwud al-Siyar ila Jinan al-Akyar.
Okay, let's unpack that. The title feels like it holds a lot of meaning.
It really does. So TAZAWWUD, that translates roughly as the provision or maybe the viaticum, supplies you take for a journey.
A journey through life? Or towards the afterlife?
Both, really. It implies the spiritual and intellectual food needed for life, with an eye towards the hereafter. Then you have al-Siyar.
Which means?
The little ones or the youth. So right there, it signals Bamba's focus on teaching the young, starting early.
And the last part, ila Jinan al-Akyar.
That's to the gardens of the chosen. It paints this vivid picture of paradise, the ultimate goal, the destination that this provision helps you reach.
So putting it together, the provision for the youth to the gardens of the chosen. Wow.
It frames learning these fundamentals as absolutely vital preparation for a meaningful journey.
And the way the book is written, its structure also serves that purpose, right? It's a poem.
Yes, it's written as an urjusa. That's a specific kind of didactic poem using a meter called rajaz.
Why choose that form?
Well, the analysis suggests it's because the rajaz meter is known for its relative simplicity, its rhythm. It makes the text much easier to memorize.
Ah, okay.
And that's a classic pedagogical technique in Islamic tradition, especially for beginners, using poetry and memorization to really embed core principles.
So the form isn't just artistic, it's functional. It's part of the teaching method itself.
Exactly.
And what are the core principles it covers? The source mentions 3 pillars.
That's right. It covers the absolute essentials. Iman, faith, what you believe, Islam, practice, the pillars of worship, submission. And Ihsan, this is often translated as spiritual excellence or doing things beautifully with awareness of God.
So the foundations of the religion.
The absolute foundations. And TAZAWWUD Al-SIGHAR presents them very concisely in this memorable format, making these potentially abstract ideas really accessible, particularly for young minds.
Now, the analysis touches on when it might have been written, maybe later in his life, during that Mauritania exile, perhaps?
That's one possibility the study mentions, yes. It would fit that pattern of him writing intensely during exile.
Okay.
But what's really striking, and Dr. KB highlights this, is how Cheikh Bamba himself described the book's origin.
Oh, what did he say?
He stated he composed it for the face of his generous Lord. He called it a useful and honored poem, one that leads people towards sciences, action, and good behavior.
That's quite a description.
But then there's this really powerful statement about its source, where he says, and this gives you a sense of its perceived importance, God, the eternal supporter, authorized me to compose it.
Wow, divine authorization.
Exactly. That elevates it, you see. It's not just his own valuable teaching. It's presented as divinely sanctioned guidance. It carries immense weight within the tradition because of that.
That certainly adds another dimension. And even though the title mentions the youth, it wasn't strictly only for children.
No, not at all. The source is very clear on this. Bamba intended its benefits for everyone, older people, young men, women, because the core truths it teaches are fundamental at any age.
Okay.
You never outgrow the need for these foundations.
And the source mentions a strong belief in the spiritual rewards, the merit of learning it.
Oh, definitely. The study talks about how within the Murai tradition, there's this deep belief in the blessings that come from reading it, memorizing it, things like eternal happiness, protection.
So it's deeply venerated.
Immensely.
Yeah.
Mastering this knowledge, especially from childhood, is viewed as gathering this incredibly valuable treasure. It is the TAZAWWUD, that essential provision for navigating this life and preparing for the next. That's the core idea.
So when you look at the whole picture, his life, his resistance, this book, it becomes clear he wasn't just a spiritual leader or, an anti-colonial figure. He was deeply invested in education, a visionary pedagogue, really.
Absolutely. TAZAWWUD Al-SIGHAR is almost the perfect example of that. It's concise, it's brilliant, it uses these traditional, effective methods, the poetry, the memorization, to pass on the absolute bedrock of faith and purpose to the next generation. It's a masterclass in spiritual pedagogy.
It really sums up his approach beautifully. And thinking about all this, especially the methods he used, it kind of raises a question for today, doesn't it?
What are you thinking?
Well, considering how focused Bamba was on these methods, the didactic poetry, the emphasis on memorization, what relevance do those kinds of traditional pedagogical approaches have now?
In our world.
Yeah, in our world today, which is just saturated with constant fleeting information, can these older methods still effectively instill essential knowledge, deep values in young people?
That's a really interesting question. Does that kind of focused, structured learning, that commitment to memory, still offer something vital when everything is so instant, so digital?
Right. Does it build a different kind of foundation? It's complex, obviously, and probably goes beyond the specific deep dive.
But it's definitely food for thought, prompted by looking closely at his work.
It really is something to mull over.
A valuable takeaway.
Indeed. Well, thank you for digging into this with us. It's been fascinating exploring Cheikh Ahmadou Bamba's world and the enduring power of TAZAWWUD Al-SIGHAR.
يا منازل على فرد الأكابر